All right, welcome everybody to the 31st episode of the Advisor Tech Book Live podcast. My guest today is Cornelius Grobner of Shatterpoint AI. Welcome,
Hey,
Cornelius.
hey, Joe. Glad to be here. Pleasure.
So, first topic of the day, we were talking a little bit about Lord of the Rings. I'm actually wearing the One Ring, so I'm invisible.
There you go.
um, I feel like this past weekend became very apparent to me that I was this whole like Lord of the Rings AI advisor tech map breaks down at some point. So I'd love to figure out exactly where it breaks down because I'm a very simple minded guy and I'm trying to destroy the One Ring and you're trying to build the One Ring. So at some point, I think we're going to come to a bit of an issue.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'm one of the, one of the seven rings, for the elves or something like that. But
There you
you
go.
know,
That's cute.
powerful. Each one powerful in its own regard, and if you combine them, you can defeat the one ring. Something like that.
So what do you think is AI really good at and really helping humanity with?
Yeah. So, I mean, in my mind, AI is really an amplification mechanism, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it shortens the time to knowledge. And so, what it does not is it does not create new knowledge, right? But sort of like, if you feed it the right contextual information, it becomes very powerful. And so, the way that I think about AI is that it really amplifies. Um, the existing experience and the creativity, and the human qualities of people, right? In the way that we use AI, or that I like to use AI, is really to get um, rid of, or to greatly reduce the amount of time I spend on sort of like tasks that are just sort of like repetitive, or otherwise sort of like not productive, right? And that's, I think, where AI shines, and that's how we build AI into the Shatterpoint solution.
Nice. So do you want to share a little bit about what you're building, the category it's in, and then where you feel like it fits into the I always do like these three-part questions. I don't know why, but
Yeah,
what you're building, what category, and then where it fits into
yeah.
the advisor's tech stack.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, we're calling it an AI native operating system for wealth advisory, right? And I think it's a difficult term, right? It's not a category that really exists. You can call it a bunch of things. I've heard other people, when I described it to them, think about it as a central nervous system. VCs like the term AI orchestrating layer. At the end of the day, the what we're building is essentially the brain of an advisory firm. So think every document you've ever ingested, every email you've ever received or sent to a client, every market data update that you've ever gotten. We basically take all of that, we ingest it, we organize that knowledge, we put it into client profiles, right? And then from there, we surface it and run it through our system to do useful things, right? So that's sort of like the abstract way of speaking. But if you've ever if you have ever compiled a proposal, and the client sent you like 30 documents, their
Yeah.
tax returns and so on and so forth, and their current portfolio holdings, maybe power of attorneys, right? Basically, I mean, one way to think about Shatterpoint is we have an intelligent hopper. You throw all of these documents in, we organize them, and then build intelligence on top of these documents, right? And so, at the very basic level, we classify documents. We looked at how multifamily offices operate, right? And there is an investment solutions division. Usually, there's insurance services, there's tax services, there's legal and estate services, right? So those are the core services that many provide, or and should that should talk to each other. And so when we ingest these documents, right, we basically initially classify them as one of these services, but then make sure that throughout the process they speak to each other.
Do you think of each area of expertise as an agent? And do you train it like that? Or is it kind of the documents come in and there's one single agent that can identify and decipher the data and move it where it needs to go.
No, it's definitely not one agent, right? And I think it's also completely, basically, if you put three people in a room and ask them, what is an agent, you get five different answers, right? To one of these situations. Um, but at the end of the day, right? I mean, there's a bunch of different things that happen. So one is sort of like the document organization, right? So you need to understand. Um, what is in this document, and then frankly you need to make it machine readable, right? And machines read differently than humans do. So simply storing a document as a PDF or as a Word document, right, and then letting an AI run over it, that's not gonna cut it. So at the basis level, we ingest documents, extract the information that is contained therein, and then store that information in a structured way, right? Then, another service that we provide is that or not that we provide, but that is inherent in what we're building, is that there is a redaction service. So, right, so any personal information that is in these documents is stripped out and stored in different tables, right? So that when you run a model over any document, right, there is no mention of, it extracts sort of like the information from the document, but it cannot associate that information with an individual, or with a family, or with a firm, or with with stuff like that, right?
Yeah, so
Um,
that's actually super interesting and maybe important to pause on for a minute. So let's say I don't know, a tax document comes in, you
mm,
actually separate the personal identifiable information like names, social security numbers, whatever like that, and put that in one table, and then everything else goes into a different table, and then the AI that reads actually only looks at the non-identifiable information. Is that
exactly, right. So the AI doesn't even look at the documents, because I mean, yeah, you can upload a PDF into ChatGPT, or into frankly any model, and we use a vast number of models. So we use obviously paid models, stock models, but we also use anyway, can get into the technology later on. So, but what the AI reads is not the document in and of itself. It's the markdown that we've generated from that document, right? And that then doesn't contain any personal identifiable information. It really extends to phone numbers. It also extends to account numbers, and it's really interesting. It's one of those edge cases. So oftentimes, if you have a client with multiple accounts and you have transfer between accounts, right, you need to ensure that basically in the in the document, the one account information will be reducted, but not the other, right? And so we solve all these complications. And at the end of the day, when we upload documents and then let AI do anything on top of the documents, they're clean. They're basically, there's no way to associate them with an individual. What stays in the document, however, is sort of like the composition of a portfolio, or sort of like the um, entity information in a power of attorney, right? It just gets redacted into a string, essentially. So a random combination of numbers and letters. Yeah. So, but back to the question, right? Is it one agent, right? I think the other thing that's very important about what we're doing is that, we differentiate between things that LLMs can do and things that LLMs shouldn't be doing. And one thing that I feel very strongly about is that LLMs shouldn't be the ones calculating anything,
okay?
because LLMs are very bad at this, right? I mean, they're getting better, but at the end of the day, at the very, very end of the day, um, a large language model, a transformer model, is a probabilistic model, right? It tries to guess what the next word is based on all the context it has, right? And what you want in finance, or in general, any type of, not only in finance, but also in taxation and insurance and accounting, is you want to run predictive models, right? Where if you input one thing into the model, no matter what happens, always the same outcome, right? And so we think about these, or the way that we speak about these in Shatterpoint is as domain logics. And so one thing that we build, so we have sort of like the contextual data backbone, for the lack of a better term, right? It's a technical term that we use. We still like it. When we have an enterprise grade security on top of that, we have roles based access control, and so on and so forth. Basically, just to ensure that data security, AI governance, and all that kind of stuff is maintained. On top of that, we put these domain logics so we can actually calculate outcomes. For example, if you have say risk or factor models, which are super useful. They're also a little bit nerdy, but at the end of the day, what a risk or factor model will be able to tell you is sort of like, what drives performance in your portfolio? What drives the risk in your portfolio? Is there concentration risk? Is there overexposure into a single geography or asset class? These kind of things, right? And then where the agent comes in, so the agent, or what we think about as agents, or the large language models, is in helping interpret that information that we've calculated into digestible terms, or in terms that, if you did your CFA 20 years ago and you kind of know what, a Sharp or a Sortino is, right? Um, Sort of like, basically, uh, we create the cliff notes for you to help explain to a client in very simple but accurate terms, you know, here's what's happening with your portfolio, or here's how the portfolio interacts with your taxes, or here's how your power of attorney is. Well, maybe that's not a great example, but sort of like, here's how your estate plan is out of sync with your business operations that we also do accounting for, right?
Yeah.
So that, at the end of the day, is sort of like the differentiation between the underlying data, which is important, right, and then sort of like a governance logic, and then the domain logic, and then only on top of that we put agents. And frankly, there's a lot of agents. There is a summarization agent where we, for example, summarize in easy terms um, you know, data or analysis, right? There is there's an email response agent where we can easily reply, here's an email that I received for a client. And then instead of giving a generic answer, we can construct an answer that is deeply informed in the realities of the portfolio, but also in the investment philosophy of the firm that we're working with, and so on and so forth. Right. So that's basically how I differentiate between um, you know agents, and then sort of like logics that are underneath and enable the agent to work properly.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily understand like all the nuts and bolts of AI, but I do feel like I'm starting to get a handle on who actually knows what they're talking about and who is doesn't, or not really thinking it through. There are some people that talk about, they understand human psychology very deeply. They understand trust and credibility and data and, you know, information that AI shouldn't be given access to. Um, and they're thinking all these things through very deeply, which it's obvious to me that you are.
Thank you. Yeah. Well,
And
yeah. Go
there's
ahead.
some people that are just like apply AI to everything and it's all better. Everything's more efficient. And it's it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
if
Yeah.
if you're sending 1,000 emails to 1,000 different people written by AI with like one line that's semi personalized, like no, that will not build trust. But I think that it's so in my mind, it's like there's good applications of AI and there's bad applications of AI. And so instead of just throwing the entire thing out and being like all AI is bad, there is some good AI, and I think that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like what AI is actually very good for human beings, helps them get the boring, tedious work done faster, and what AI is actually hurtful and damaging to humans. Um,
Yeah, and I think that's a super important distinction, right? I think so I come out of the institutional asset management space, right? So I've worked through my career with, I did impact investing for George Soros. I build a startup that supplied data sets to institutional investors. I was a VP of product management at FactSet, where most of our clients were hedge funds and large institutional investors. I think at the end of the day, if you think about the differentiation between investing money for an institutional asset owner, like the Ontario's Teachers Pension Fund, versus investing money for an individual, high net worth or ultra high net worth individual or household, right? I think there is a lot of overlaps, but I think the core difference is that wealth management is all about building trust. It's about becoming a partner. I know a lot of people who basically, a lot of people don't like their wealth managers, right? Because they think they're being overcharged. But at the end of the day, if you really, I spoke with a friend last week who sold his, startup, made a good amount of money, and I was like, yeah, so, how's it going with your search for? And he's like, oh, I hate, he didn't like any of them. And, he's a technologist, so, he has to jump through 17 different hoops. But at the end of the day, he said, hey, I'm paying, or I'm happy to pay a fee to somebody because, at the very end of the day, if something should happen to me, I want my wife and my children to have somebody to speak to, right? And I think that goes to the sort of like the core of the trust relationship that you want to be building, or as a wealth manager that you want to build, right? And what we're trying to do with Shatterpoint is really to allow you to spend time on building trust with your clients, right? And sort of like all the boring stuff, that usually needs to happen in order to build that trust. We can take that over. And to me, that includes, right, right. So I think, where actually I think wealth management can learn from institutional asset management, or can take a couple of, it's sort of like in sort of the deliberate way and the contextual way that portfolios are constructed, right? So I think all investments are contextual, and the difference between investing money for the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund versus investing money for a high net worth family is that the Ontario Teacher Pensions Fund will tell you exactly what their upcoming liabilities are, what their preferences are, what their risk tolerance is, and so on and so forth, right? They get that all
Sure.
figured out. So in that way, it's a lot easier. As a wealth manager, you have to figure these things out, right? And then ideally you apply them, into the way, you service that particular family.
How does the pension or fund typically relay that information to the institutional asset manager? Like, is there an actual word like it, like request for proposal or something? Or
Yeah, those are long-standing relationships, right? And then there's structured documents and sort of like metrics and ratios, but most importantly, most institutional asset owners know exactly what their upcoming liabilities are, right?
yeah,
What they're, and in the wealth management space, I would call them goals, right? Because if you have a pension fund, you know exactly, here's what we need to, here's the cash flow we need to have available in any given month in order to pay out the pensions, right? And that then informs the way you structure your investment, right? And I think the trick for the wealth manager is to get to that rigor, and to that kind of credibility. But if you did that, right, you wouldn't have any time to spend with your clients, right? Or you would have to hire a ton of staff and analysts, and then they would go against your margin. And those are the kind of things that we want to apply AI to, right? So basically, again, all the boring, repetitive, tedious work, and then you can spend time with your clients, really, whether or not, the cliche is sort of like you go play golf with the client, right? But it can also just be sort of like moving from, I speak to my client on the phone once a quarter to I speak to my client on the phone once a week. And it's not always maybe it's just a check-in call. So like, hey, how are things going? What's on your mind? Blah, 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 whatever. But whatever it is, and that I think AI has no role to play, right? So however you as a wealth advisor want to structure your relationship or think, this is how I build a quality relationship with your client. You should be able to decide that, but then AI should support you in doing that.
Yeah. So if we
So,
go back to categories for a bit, so like I think one of the first use cases was the AI note takers, and it was like the number one thing advisors do is meet with clients. There's prep, there's follow up, there's action items. Like is the use case is very simple. Um, and Michael Kitts recently was on a podcast, and he's like, it's not actually making advisors more productive. Like, and he actually walked through like some very specific examples, like the prep time might be a little shorter, but maybe that means they talk to the previous client, 7 minutes longer. And then, when they have their last meeting for the day, maybe they go home 15 minutes earlier. Like he's like, there's not actually like these massive productivity gains from having an AI note taker. Um, I think the other thing that's interesting is just like emails. So if you sit down at your computer and you type out an email and you send it to someone, let's say a client of Shatterpoint or something, um, or if you tell your AI what to write and then AI drafts an email and you just verbatim whatever the AI suggests you sent it. If you send words that you didn't write, are those words from you? Like I think it's kind of a um
yeah, look, I
it's kind
mean,
of an interesting
yeah.
thing to think through, but like especially on LinkedIn. So I think I'm trying to come up with like a very simple question, like, is this use of AI building trust or is this use of AI tearing down trust? Um, I think there are times when if you're using AI to draft the email and you send the email, maybe it's just a very factual email and there's not really any relationship being built there or torn down there. But there are other emails like if one of your clients, one of their children passes away or something, like if you use AI to write that email, like it might be kind of obvious that I don't know. There's
That would not be a good use of AI, right? So
yeah,
I think we can all agree with like, disingenuous or so like, I didn't want to. I mean, basically what that says is like, I did not want to spend the 10 minutes thinking about what I truly feel about that person and their loss.
right.
And I'd rather outsource it to, some rando algorithm that gets executed in a data farm, in a data center somewhere, in space, in 20 years down the road. But but again, I think, frankly, what these, so I don't have an opinion necessarily. I mean, I have a personal opinion, but I think every advisor needs to figure that out for themselves, what they, want to do, right? But I would also, I mean, so on note takers and email, at the end of the day, I think about these as information vectors, right? And so, for example, I mean, what we do is basically, if you store every email that a client has ever sent to you, sort of like becomes very easy to just get up to speed on a client, right? Sort of like just, I mean, and you would do that the same way you would cursory read the last 10 emails or the last 5 emails or the last exchange. You would cursory read it, and then sort of like your brain puts together, and I think that might take you 10 minutes, right? And then sort of like if you have an AI produce 3 bullet points that sum up the relationship, right, it might take you 2 minutes, right? um, Whether or not this is a good use of your time, that's a different one. I think, but those are sort of like the less interesting use cases in my mind. And that's frankly also, I know that note takers are a very convenient way to get, a wedge product, as they say. It's easy to build and it's easy to sell, or it's very easy to sell, right? But I think the value of the note taker in and of itself is low unless you know what to do with the information. So a note taker that just generates a note and you store it somewhere and then never brings it up again. So like it's basically, it gives you 2 minutes maybe or 10 minutes of your time back. But at the end of the day, I mean, that's also not what we do with Shatterpoint. Basically, AI is only as good as the data you give it. Right. And we really spend most of our time thinking about sort of like that contextual data backbone, right? How do we need to structure it? I mean, essentially, one way to think about it is as a graph type of database, right? And then there's technical questions and cost questions and so on and so forth. So that's basically how we spend our time.
So it's almost like a structured data lake. Is that
Structured
fair?
data lake. I mean, the way I think about it is that every household or every client is a profile,
Yeah.
right? And then you you seed that profile with information you have at the beginning, right? So, for example, uh, one of the design partners that we're working with is a multifamily office, right? And so they meet with ultra high net worth individuals, and then sort of like they pitch them on, here's what we do and how we do it, right? And then they sign an NDA, and then the next thing that happens is that after they sign the NDA, they request certain documents from the client, right? And then the client just dumps all the documents on it. And it can be 10, 15, 20, and they come in the weirdest form, right? And so, at the end of the day, that's basically how we seed the profile, right? And then that profile exists, and then you plug in, we plug in a document management system, for example. So if your note taker stores your transcript somewhere, right, we can ingest them automatically, right? But you basically the profile gets richer over time, and then because everything we do sits on top of that profile, also every action we do, or every action you ever do, every rebalance, every decision that was ever made, right, goes back into that profile, right? And so as a secondary effect is that all of a sudden you can use that profile to understand, you see a position in portfolios created 7 years ago. Why is it there, right? You can
Yeah. You
in
start to get some context.
exactly, you get just a sort of like, oh, and frankly, this happens all the time. I see portfolios all the time where their positions are like, oh, sort of like uh, like a fancy car stock, right? It makes no sense from a risk perspective or returns perspective, but sort of like, yeah, okay, 7 years ago that guy owned a Maserati, really liked it, and then bought some stock, and that was ultimately the context behind that. And then the question is, oh, does he still own the Maserati? No, okay, then maybe we can get rid of that position in sort of like the next rebalance or cycle or something like that. Right? I mean, this is sort of like an illustrative example. The other thing that it becomes useful for are compliance purposes, right? Because you can really understand, every decision that was made with regards to a portfolio can be traced to an exact conversation or an email or a promise or a request or a preference, that the client might have communicated. So that's again, I think sort of like the interesting part of AI is not necessarily. I mean, AI is exciting and everything, but the interesting part is the underlying data structure, and I think that at the end of the day, that separates sort of like the tourists from the people who know what they're doing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I recently heard or said something to the effect of most AI is being used to solve symptoms and not the actual root
Yeah,
problem.
yeah,
And
yeah.
the people that are actually solving the root problems. Um, so maybe I have this wrong, but it sounds in a way like you're building a future version of a CRM. Like CRM has been, or not quite. I think there's like some people are saying we're gonna have an all-in-one system and we're gonna start with custodian, and some people say we're gonna have an all-in-one system and we're starting with AI note taker, and then some people are like we're just gonna build from CRM, and then the CRM is gonna spread into some other areas. So it's
Yeah.
like it's almost like the data. Everyone knows the data is the foundation. The question is, which data are you gonna start with to build your all in one operating system.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, a CRM is is a database with a UI on top of it, right?
Yeah.
And, in investment management, Orion or you know, uh, Adepower are, you know, uh, it's a database with a logic and a UI on top, right? So
Yeah.
in that way, I think all of these categories, frankly, are up for grabs, right? I think ultimately, at the end of the day, I mean, one way. So from a very practical perspective, the way that we figure out with what to start is by working together embedded with partners, right? So
Yeah.
we follow a methodology. We don't build stuff, but we do design partnerships, and we're also not out in the market yet, but we are in what we call closed beta with select design partners. And practically that means I mean, we build all that architecture stuff in the background, but then with each of my design partners, I speak regularly and ask them, what is on your mind? What are you building? What is your biggest time suck? We do a before, we onboard a new design partner, or as we onboard a new design partner, that, we always do sort of like a long session, 1, 2, 3 hours, sort of like, okay, let's go through your business processes and identify, if you were to 10x your business in the next 5 years, what would you need to fix, right? And that's how we very
It's a good
practically.
question. I've heard that before, but that's a very good way to identify the bottlenecks.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so, I mean, with one of our design partners, they were like, oh, we get referred all the time. They're very confident in their services and their quality of service, but for them, the bottleneck was really proposal generation, because they said, okay, between that moment we sign an NDA to we, can meet again with a client and present them with what we think we would be doing with their assets, and sort of like how we would manage that client, right? Was somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks, because in those 4 and 6 weeks, right, they went through all the portfolio statements, they went through all the Excel tables, everything, but they did manually, right? And sort of like now, I mean, frankly, we just throw all that stuff into a hopper, and then the next day, I mean, technically after an hour or two, sort of like you have sort of like the base of an analysis of the existing holdings, the relationships of the family, the exposures, and so on and so forth, right? And then it's frankly up to they were like, yeah, but we don't really want to get back to the client the next day, because it might seem like we want to retain a little bit of exclusivity, so if I
There's a
can.
bit of a problem I haven't heard about yet. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
using AI and it's working so well that we actually delay when we respond to
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
client because we don't
But
want
it,
them to know how fast it took.
yeah, yeah. So, but that's at the end of the day, how we figure out. And frankly, I just haven't heard note takers yet.
Yeah.
So I've never heard anybody say sort of like, you know, I mean, either they use a note taker already, and then sort of like we can just dip into the document management system, and basically just tell them, hey, if you use a note taker already, please, store the transcripts in an organized way, right? And then we just take them out of there. Ultimately, though, at the end of the day, I mean, one way to think about is, a business is sort of like in every business, you have a certain number of people who drive the value of the business, right? And then you have other people that support the people that drive the value of the business. And it was a discussion, I had with a friend who works in AI for hedge funds. We had a discussion. Sort of okay, what is an AI native hedge fund, right? And most people would say sort of like, oh, it's a system that does all the research and then supports capital allocation positions, right? I think if you were to build an AI native hedge fund, what I would focus on is identifying, if you have Bridgewater or Point 72, all of these are organizations at the end with somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 people, or sometimes a little bit larger, sometimes a little bit smaller. And then maybe there's sort of like a group of 100 or 150 or so people that drive the decisions, allocate the capital, and create the value, right? the AI you want to build is supposed to be hyper focused on helping these 150 people or 120 people do their job better or be happier, or and then you automate the rest. And so you can apply this to to a family office or a multi-family office situation, right? You have client relationship and service delivery, you have investment management, you have custodial and account operations, you have tax operations, trust and estate administrations, right? You have cash flow and bill pay. You have financial planning and modeling. You have compliance and risk management, performance and reporting, specialized services, right? Technology and data infrastructure, right? All of that needs to be managed. And I mean, you were a COO of a firm, right? You know how basically, so if I you can frankly automate most or almost all of these services pretty seamlessly, right? And that's how I think about an AI native operating system for wealth management, right? It's not sort of like we help you take better notes, or we help you find clients easier, or we, generate estate documents in a faster way, But it's basically, I mean, all of that, right? You want to be able to do all of that. And the truth is that, in 2026 we will see that. um, you know it is fairly easy to build an agent, right, if you know what you're doing, right? And so building an environment where 10, 15, 25, 50, 100 agents operate. And some of them operate autonomously and others operate supervised, but each one does a piece of a puzzle. And then you have sort of like an orchestration agent, sort of like a COO who sort of makes sure that everybody talks to each other and nobody steps on each other's feet, right? That is entirely possible. And I mean, when we build an agent in the beginning, it used to take us a week or two to build, sort of like from ideation to prototype. Today, it takes us 2 or 3 days tops, right? And that's how you scale them. Again, what you don't know, or you can't build an agent unless you're truly immersed in the workflow. And that's again where sort of like these design partnerships come in.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I'm thinking about like I don't know if it's value generating roles or revenue generating roles and non-revenue generating roles. Um, but I think of like, if there's a financial advisor, so the fastest growing RIAs actually separate the sales and marketing functions from there's like a sales advisor and then there's a servicing advisor.
Yeah,
At creative planning, at United Capital, at Root Financial, like all the fastest growing RIAs separate like the selling advisor from the servicing advisor, which I find interesting. Probably because they just take different skill sets. The people that are really good at servicing have different skill sets than the people that are really good at selling.
yeah,
Um, so those are the two value generating roles,
yeah.
and then basically, you think AI can just help those two roles do their job better? Is that
Yeah, yeah, and then I mean, and here we come back to the Lord of the Rings. Right? Maybe it is not the one ring that we're building, but it is sort of like, uh, you know, uh, what is it? The seven rings for the dwarves and the five
yeah,
for the elves. Anyway, so I mean, you build one ring for that group of people and another ring for that group of people. And when these two rings sort of like when they're in communication with each other, sort of like that's when sort of like the magic happens. And uh, you can, yeah, but at the end of the day, that's pretty much what it boils down to. So I think, yeah, every time I hear sort of like, it's a little bit cringe, sort of like AI native operating system or whatever, right? I'm not a marketing person.
I
But
think relationship operating systems, what James Cantwell called it, um, and especially in this business. I mean, honestly, I think in just about everybody in every business, like it comes down to the relationship. It's the guy that comes out and fixes my septic system. Like I trust him because someone else trusted him and told me about him. And the two times I've had him come out and fix it, like he's been reliable. So like even that is a
yeah,
relationship business at the end of the day. And he just needs a way to keep track of his clients, keep track of his payments, and then deliver his expertise, which
And frankly, I mean, and that's where, communicate better, right? And then sort of like sometimes it's just sort of like, and that's where, for example, I wouldn't totally rule out that there's a role of AI generated emails or text messages, that you can play. Just saying sort of like, hey, saw it, no time at the moment, we'll get to you, but sort of like, just sort of like an acknowledgement, or, I mean, you can also already auto generate, but frankly, most people are really, really bad at setting these services up, right? That said, sort of like, I mean, part of the current problem, and you know this better than most people, right, is that you have, every time you want to set up another service, it basically, you need to look at vendors, you need to look at, you compare prices, there's integrations that you need to manage. You really, it's work to set these up, right? And if you don't set them up properly, you end up transferring information manually between one system and another. And then, something gets lost and basically, it falls through the cracks. And then you don't have that. So, I think sort of like 8 to 12 is sort of like the average system that you run. I mean, the promise of AI is really you can massively reduce that number of systems, right? And then all of a sudden, the same system that sort of like through one agent create sort of like an estate management plan, or at least a draft of one, can also be used to, on the other side, just send, a short note to a client like, here, you know uh, here's what's currently happening in the markets, right? And here's sort of like, or, some other short notification. So you don't need separate systems for these anymore, right? And again, all of this, as long as all of this draws from a joint data foundation, that contextual data backbone, right? Then that's basically when stuff starts to work.
yeah, and I was talking with one person about it, and he's like, we use AI like to do it does our voicemails and it sends emails and it sends text, but we always get the human's permission first. And I thought that was really thoughtful. Like,
Yep.
let the person know it's a human and a human, while it's still, a high trust environment. Like, let them know, hey, I'm going to have my AI agent reach out to schedule our next appointment. Is that okay? And
Yep.
if they say yes, now you have their permission for the rest of the relationship to use AI to, you know, look at two calendars and find an open spot.
Yeah.
It's when people bring in AI to start doing things without your permission, um, that I think it starts to break down trust. Um,
Yeah, I think there's things that can be done without permission, right? Or maybe I'll regret that statement, but
no, no, I agree. I mean, like, if you're ingesting a bunch of documents and using AI
yeah,
to they don't care if you're paying a human analyst or you're paying a
yeah,
software
yeah, yeah,
program.
exactly right. So at the end of the day, it's like an assistant. That's if you have an assistant and they're really good, then they really help you keep on top of things, right? And they send little reminders, and if the reminder is as stupid as sort of like, hey, did you remember to call uh, client XYZ because their son is going to college next month and you want to hear how that is going,
Yeah,
right? So little things like this. But yeah, at the end of the day, yeah, wealth management is all about relationships. It's all about trust. Maybe actually, it's. I mean, to be super honest, I think wealth management is more. I have no problems. It's a cold winter. The engine of our two zone, the downstairs heat hasn't worked for since Thursday. I have no problem switching between contractors, because it's a stupid end. So one contractor was like, yeah, I may be able to take a look at that tomorrow, and the other one was more responsive, and then a third one had sort of like the part, blah, no problem switching between that, right?
right.
If it's about managing your money, setting up your estate, doing your taxes, right? Um, but yeah, I also think, I think we had this discussion a while ago, sort of like, what is the best organic method of growth? I think, frankly, one way to think about this is to, stack rank services based on the amount of trust they require, right? And then you can start, um, I think one way that I've seen this applied, one, sorry, or to start differently, why am I saying that, right? So throughout this journey of building Shatterpoint, again, I come out of institutional asset management, but I spoke to, maybe before we ever wrote the first line of code, I spoke to maybe 80 or 100 or so wealth managers. And so one thing that really struck me is the fastest growing firms that I spoke to, they never started with investment management. It was always sort of like insurance and accounting services that had then acquired an investment management service and
Interesting.
put it on top, right?
Yeah.
And so I think if you start to stack rank sort of like the service that you provide, and sort of like you essentially you start with low trust services and then expand into the high trust services. And frankly, there's not much more. I mean, this is sort of like the highest level of trust outside of, a medical relationship with your doctor, is sort of like who manages your finances and who, makes sure that, your generational wealth strategy is actually executed so that, your kids, have a great start in life. That's sort of like the pinnacle of trust. That's at the end of the day what it's all about in my mind.
Yeah. So now that there are AI financial advisors that are incredibly cheap, Origin is $1 a year right now. The question for me to lots of guests has been like, what is advice? And some people have said judgment. Some people have said, I can't think of the word. Another person said like life changing counsel. Like if there's not some sort of transformation happening in each not every conversation, but like in the relationship as a whole. Um, so in a way, managing the assets is actually like the lowest trust thing that a financial advisor would do. And then, giving someone advice that changes the course of their life, like, is up near the top. I'm trying to think.
Yeah.
It's, I don't think insurance sales is actually like the easiest thing to start with because I've been an insurance agent. It's very difficult to sell
Mm.
insurance. Nobody wants it. Um, I'm trying to think. So, like, what is a very low trust, easy like first step in a relationship, and then you work up into the life changing stuff, and the life changing stuff is actually what leads to the most referrals. I think
Yeah.
it's not, oh hey, this guy got me 10% return last year, and the S&P only did 8. Like I don't
Yeah.
think that leads to referrals.
No, no. I mean, I think that's well established and borne out by data, is that most people, as long as you basically do an okay job of not losing money, right? Basically, as long as you generate returns that are aligned with markets, your clients will be fine. I actually had a fun discussion with a friend who'd been in wealth management in Germany for years, and we were talking about benchmarks, and he was like, hey, guess what our benchmark for ultra high net worth families is. And I was like, I don't know, the DAX, or probably not the S&P. And he was like, nope, it's the German inflation rate. Right. And so, I mean, there's really, but I think one thing that could be easy to produce is sort of like an analysis of existing asset, right? Just simple portfolio analysis. Here's what I
Yeah.
have, right? Because most people grow these things organically. Basically, if you're rich, or if you're on your way to become rich, right? Oftentimes you either don't already have an existing wealth advisor that would do that in a structured and intelligent, smart. Often you just buy, yeah, I'll buy some of, hey, Bitcoin sounds great, or gold, or no, everything should, all my money goes into S&P aligned ETFs, right? And then okay, you drive a Porsche, and then you buy the stock or whatever, right? So it's an organically grown portfolio, and just to run a simple portfolio analysis, and basically tell people sort of like, okay, here's sort of like what drives returns, here's what drives, yeah, you can You can stay invested in the S&P, but if you, in the late 80s you were all in on the Nikkei, it probably also looked good for a couple of years until it
Sure.
didn't, right? And sort of like that's sort of like the problem is that this is so I think when you sort of like listed what is advice, I think competence is key, or competence, is sort of like something that maybe should be added to the list.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, sort of like a portfolio analysis is a technical skill. It's kind of tedious, and it's actually harder than it seems, because usually you don't really have all the information together in order to perform the portfolio analysis. So you end up sort of like a finger in the wind, and, you know, and that's something that AI can do really, really, really well, right? I mean, last week I analyzed a portfolio that had 5 mutual funds in it, and none of the time series were available. So the performance time series were available on the market data API that we use, right? And so here's the next agent. Honestly, here's the next agent that we're currently building is,
Okay.
um, you know, look up the fact sheets of the. So all I'm giving the agent is, here's the name of the mutual fund. Find the website site, download the fund fact sheet, download the performance, ingest it, analyze it, and then generate an analysis based on that.
Yeah.
Right. So something, and I tried it out. I mean, yeah, we're just building this agent, right? But I did the first iteration for these five, portfolio for these 5 mutual funds manually, and simply to find the average weighted MER, right, for these five was sort of like a 20-minute thing, right? But you literally sort of like, at this prototype stage that we're at, upload, 5 seconds, and that's the kind of, so it's then sort of like knowing the MER. So I mean, at the end of the day, sort of like the kind of advice you want to give is sort of like, hey, the weighted average MER on your portfolio is 1.78%, meaning that you pay annual funds of $19,000 on roughly, $1 million of mutual fund positions. And sort of like, if you just put all of this into an ETF, you would, the fee delta would be $250,000 to $280,000 in lost wealth over a 10-year period, right?
Yeah.
And so that is competence. Right? If you can do this sort of like credibly, that's competence. And based on that competence, I think competence then builds trust. And that, at the end of the day, I mean, that's basically something, that's one of the agents we're building with Shatterpoint. If
Where does competence come from?
Well, competence comes from the domain logics, right? I mean, sort of like in the very sort of like you understand, how to, at the very end of the day, if you had to do it in a spreadsheet, you would be able to do it, right? Sort of like, which basically means you list all of the, the MERs. I'm sorry, I'm kind of stuck on these
No,
MERs.
that's okay. So, like,
This is,
experience? What's another word for domain logics?
Domain logic is mastery of the underlying math,
Okay.
that is required for investment analysis, but also for insurance analysis, right? Or if you need to bring sort of like legal and estate matters into association, it's less about math and more about judgment. But
Yeah.
it's sort of like it's something that's quantifiable,
Yeah.
right? And that's, I
Almost
mean,
like
yeah.
being able to take a complicated subject and explain it simply. Like, I think that's one way to say, like,
Yeah.
domain mastery. Um,
I mean, hedge fund quants, or quants in general in institutional asset management, are paid a ton of money, right? I think I'm based in New York. I think the entry level here for a quant position is somewhere 180 or 200 or 220 or so. Um, and then basically, if you think about what you do as a quant, 80% of your time or 90% of your time, you clean data sets. right? And the remaining time you spend applying sort of like the same, 15 to 20 models all over again over different data sets. Right? That's
Okay.
something that AI can do. I mean, at the end of the day, that's competence. So if you can do it really well, right? Well, I mean, competence means that the numbers are correct at the end, right? And then the interpretation is maybe, step two. Um, and then I think where AI will take a while to get to is sort of like a true understanding of what kind of analysis you need to run in what context, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we're quite there yet, but frankly, I think it's also, um, I mean, it's not going to take forever to get us there.
Yeah, it's almost like precision and accuracy. Like precision is getting a small grouping, accuracy is the small grouping is on the target.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
Cool. Anything else people need to know about Shatterpoint before we sign off here?
Uh, Look, I mean, we're in closed beta. I think honestly, once we release this, people will be surprised with what they can do with it. And so, if anybody wants to reach out, talk to us. Happy to have any conversation. I've learned an incredible amount of things just from talking to people in this space. Right. And again, the way that we built this is through design partnerships. And so, yeah, really
Great.
looking forward.
Sweet. All right. Thanks, Cornelius, for coming on today.
Excellent, Joe. Have a good one. Thank you.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.